Assalamu alaikum dear students. I am Amir Hussain. As you know that we have completed the fourth chapter of political science, that is gender, religion and caste, and now we are going to take up the fourth chapter of history, and the fourth chapter of history is entitled as the age of industrialization. And in this the first important subtopic is before industrial revolution. It is before industrial revolution. This is first subtopic of the fourth chapter, that is the age of industrialization. And in this topic what we are going to discuss, actually in this whole chapter, that is the age of industrialization, what we are going to discuss, actually we are going to discuss the history of industrialization, how and where the process of industrialization began, and also we will more focus on the histories of industrialization, histories of industries in England, in Britain, and we will also, because in this England or Britain is the first industrial nation, and secondly we will also discuss in this chapter about the industrial process, the history of industries in India also, and how the pattern of industrial change was conditioned by the colonial rule in India. We will discuss all that in this chapter. So our first this topic is the before industrialization. And before going into this, actually there are some misconceptions. There are some misconceptions, or you can say there are some wrong notions regarding or related to this industrialization. When we say industrialization, it comes in our mind. When we say industrialization, perhaps what people meant by this is the growth of factory industry. It is the growth of factory industry. And similarly, when people say industrial production, industrial production, at that time what they meant factory production. They meant factory production. And similarly, industrial worker, when we say industrial worker, we mean factory worker. And we often, or people often say that histories of industrialization, that histories of industrialization begin with the establishment of with the establishment of first factories. So these are some wrong notions, some misconceptions which are always associated with the industrial revolution or industrialization. Because sometimes we say, when we say, or people, when people say industrialization, at that time they meant perhaps the growth of factory industry. They always associate this factory with the industrialization process. Similarly, industrial production, they mean factory production, and industrial worker, they mean factory worker. And they often believe that this histories of industrialization begin with the establishment of the first factories. But these notions are actually wrong notions. These are misconceptions that people have with related to the industrialization process. Why so? Because before before the appearance before the appearance of factories in England and Europe, it was seen that there was large scale industrial there was large scale industrial production. There was large scale industrial production, and this large scale industrial production was carried it was carried out by or it was carried out with the help of vast number of producers, and these producers were working within their farms and not in factories, right? And historians, and these were producers not for not in farms, rather than they are these workers, they worked in the fact not in factories, rather than they worked in farms. And whom they were producing for, ये किसके लिए प्रोड्यूस कर रहे थे? Actually they were producing for international market. They were producing for international market. So this was the condition that prevailed before the industrial revolution. And historians have referred to this period, or you can also say phase. They have referred to this period or phase of industrialization as what? As proto-industrialization. They have referred to this phase as proto-industrialization. And what they mean by proto-industrialization? Proto-industrialization actually means early. It means early phase. So this is the important thing. That is, before industrialization, before the industrial revolution, before the appearance of industries in the Britain and in Europe, what was the condition there? Actually, there was large scale industrial process, there was large scale industrial production, and that industrial production was not carried out in factories, rather than that was carried out in the farms. And there were the workers who were producing, who were helping in the process of industrial production. And that's why this phase is called as the This is regarded by the historians as the proto-industrialization. Proto means this is early phase of industrialization. This is the early phase of industrialization in which there were not there were no industries, there were no industries, no factories, rather than there were farms in which these workers were working. So this is important thing about industrialization process. Now, how was this industrialization carried out? What this proto industrialization, who were the workers who were working there, and how this process started? Now we will this look into that. Actually, it was in 17th and 18th century. It was in 17th and 18th centuries actually that merchants in Europe began moving from towns to what they from they were moving they started moving they you can say they migrated from towns to countryside. And countryside means villages, it means rural side, it means villages. It was in 17th and 18th centuries that the merchants, that in Europe merchants started migrating. And where from they started migrating? They started migrating from towns. From towns where they actually lived, they migrated from towns to these countryside. They went towards countryside, and within countryside or within villages or countryside, these merchants they began employing or they began employing peasants. Remember this thing, they began employing peasants and artisans within the villages. Within the villages, they employed the peasants and the peasants and the artisans. Not only they employed them, they also provided them, they supplied them money. And they also persuaded them to work to produce for an international production, for an international market. दे परसुएडेड देम, इन्होंने इनको एक तो मनी दे दिया. ये जो मर्चेंट्स हैं 17th 18th सेंचुरीज में आप देखोगे यूरोप में ये मर्चेंट्स जो है ये मूव करने लगे, ये टाउन्स से अपने टाउन से बाहर निकले और ये कंट्री साइड जाने लगे, ये विलेजेस में जाने लगे. और विद इन विलेजेस इन्होंने क्या किया? दे स्टार्टेड गिविंग मनी, प्रोवाइडिंग मनी, सप्लाइंग मनी टू दीज पेजेंट्स एंड आर्टिजन्स, एंड दे आल्सो परसुएडेड देम टू प्रोड्यूस फॉर द इंटरनेशनल मार्केट. इन्होंने इनको ये परसुएड किया, मनवाया, इन्होंने राजी किया इनको कि आप इंटरनेशनल मार्केट के लिए प्रोड्यूस करो. और वाई they migrated and what happened actually, we are going to discuss the reasons behind why these merchants they migrated in this Europe from the towns to countryside. We will discuss that. There are actually number of reasons why they employed these peasants and artisans within the villages. First important reason was growing demand. It was growing demand. First important reason why these merchants they started employing workers, especially these peasants and artisans within the villages. The first reason is growing demand. What this growing demand is, actually it was seen that there was expansion of world trade, and also acquisition of colonies in different parts of the world. Two things were seen. In the 17th 18th century, two things were seen. One was the growing demand, one was the this expansion of world trade. The world trade expanded, and also there was acquisition of colonies in different parts of the world. Different powers, different companies, they started acquiring more and more territories in different parts of the world. Because of these two trends, it led to the demand for goods, it increased. Because of these two things, because of the expansion of world trade and because of the acquisition of colonies in different parts of world, the demand for goods increased. Goods की demand increase होने लगी. And now the town merchants the town merchants the town merchants failed. They failed to meet the increased demands. They failed to meet the increased demands. They were not in a position to fulfill the increasing demands. And in such situation, what happened actually? These therefore, therefore, or thus, they began employing these artisans and peasants within these, because in towns there was lack of the labor. That's why they migrated to these towns, and they migrated from these towns to villages, and within villages they employed them. And they employed them, and not only they employed them, they persuaded them to work to produce for the international market, and they also provided them money. And not only they provided them money, but they also provided them some loans also. Therefore, in order to meet the rising demand, there was rising demand of the goods in the international market. So in order to meet that rising demand, these so-called merchants of the towns, they started these employing artisans and peasants within the villages. And this was the first important reason why these merchants migrated from towns to villages. So this was the first important lecture on the fourth chapter, that's the age of industrialization. And this was first subtopic, that is before the industrial revolution. Hope you have understood this well.